So, the children of Israel are in Egypt. What will it take to get them out? Only when Pharaoh realizes that the only thing worse than letting the people go is making the people stay. Like most of us, I suppose, when Pharaoh was greeted with the command of God that the Hebrews be set free, he did not respond constructively. In fact, as a shrewd administrator, he seemed to know very quickly and moved to ensure the Hebrews got all that God talk out of their minds. But as we know, God's demand here is non-negotiable. And after Pharaoh has said that he does not know the Lord, and he will not let the people go, it's clear that he needs to be shown just who he's dealing with. And so, over a period of just a few weeks, plague after plague is visited upon the land of Egypt. The river of blood, the frogs, gnats, and flies covering the land and the people. Pestilence of animals boils on everyone, hail beating down crops and trees, a swarm of locusts devouring what the hail hasn't knocked down, and a lot of what it has. And then there is darkness. Darkness so thick it could be felt. Darkness for 3 days, during which time nothing moved. And through all this, despite some frantic urging from his counselors, Pharaoh would not let the people go. And now we get to our rather short reading for today. It's not a pleasant text, but it's what finally drove Pharaoh to despair. Exodus 11 and 12. The Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go from here. Indeed, when he lets you go, he will drive you away. Moses said, Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out throughout Egypt. Every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, to the firstborn of the female slave who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Then there will be a loud cry throughout the whole land of Egypt, such as has never been or will ever be again. But not a dog shall growl at any of the Israelites, so that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Then all these officials of yours shall come down to me and bow low to me and say, Leave us, you and all the people who follow you. After that I will leave. And in hot anger he left Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, in order that my wonders may be multiplied in the land. Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go. There is then a brief excursus for the institution of Passover, which we'll get to on Monday, Thursday. The account then continues with the result of the Egyptians' refusal. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. Then he summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, Rise up! Go away from my people, both you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord, as you said. Take your flocks and your herds, as you said, and be gone. And bring a blessing on me, too. At every turn, Pharaoh has had the option to say, yes, go ahead, lead, and serve your God. But he always chooses no, until now. Remember back in chapter 1, Pharaoh was nervous about the growing Hebrew population and ordered all the male children to be killed at birth. This grim order of Pharaoh is now turned around on him. It's revisited on his own house and upon the houses of all the Egyptians, because of his stubbornness. This is God's counterclaim, showing who has the real authority over life and death in Egypt. See, Pharaoh could endure the frogs and the bugs. He could put up with a river of blood, terrible weather, animal disease, even 3 days of darkness. These things came and they went. But he had not believed the power of selective life and death that was beyond his ability to prevent even in his own household. This is too much. So now finally Pharaoh kicks these people out, hoping no doubt that they would take their vengeful God with them. I realize that the death of the firstborn in Egypt is not the usual text for Palm Sunday. After all, isn't this supposed to be a day of rejoicing at the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem? Well, of course it is. The throngs that lined the road were bursting with happiness at the great procession. Hosanna, they were shouting, young and old alike. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But I get nervous when I realize how easy it is to get lost in the hoopla and miss the essential tragic nature of what was happening even then. I get nervous when I think that so many people back then just wanted Jesus to ride into Jerusalem, wow them at the temple, kick out the bad Romans, and inaugurate a new era of peace, justice, and glory for the Hebrew people. I get nervous that even today so many people just want to go direct from Palm Sunday to Easter without acknowledging the great spiritual chasm in between. This is why I've linked these two emotion-filled events. I'd like to stop for a moment and consider that the accounts of the events on that fateful night in Egypt and on that fateful day in Jerusalem go together. They're both part and parcel of the redemption of the people of faith. They're mirror images of a crucial part of the deliverance of God's people from bondage. There could be no liberation of the Hebrew people without this dramatic demonstration of the authority of God. There could be no defeat of the power of evil unless Jesus rode into Jerusalem to meet death face to face. It's not a natural linkage because what we tend to see when we look at these passages are the differences. The Exodus passage is about tragedy. The Jerusalem passage is about triumph. In one, there's sadness all over the land, and in the other, there's joy at the coming of a king. In Egypt, people are huddled in their houses in fear. In Jerusalem, they're lining the streets in celebration. But look closer and hear the voice of the people. When the Lord struck down the firstborn throughout the land of Egypt, there was, we read, a loud cry in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. In the account in Exodus, the cry is a lamentation over the death of the firstborn. But it is that event that marks a turning point on the road to life for the Hebrew people. Even if the promised land is years away, it is this singular event that propels them on their journey. It's a journey that starts with a death for so many Egyptians, but which God will turn into a great blessing for the faithful. When Jesus rides into Jerusalem, there's another cry, a great shout raised, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest heaven." The account in Mark, the cry is a Hosanna for life, but is terribly poignant part of the road to death for Jesus. Even if our own promised land is still in process of being fully realized, this is the event that is a key part of our own journey of faith. And this journey starts with the entry of the Prince of Peace into the city of his death, an event that God will turn into a blessing for all the faithful everywhere. Look closer. Consider the inevitable confrontation of reluctance and necessity. These two events are part of what you knew had to happen. Even without 20/20 hindsight, you could figure out that the events in Egypt were going to come to some kind of climax. Even without reading ahead, you could figure out that the way Jesus' life and mission were going, events in Jerusalem were going to come to some kind of confrontation. You just knew that Pharaoh's heart would have to be broken by a tragedy of huge proportion. You just knew that Jesus would have to ride into the face of his enemy and stand before those who wanted him dead. There's almost a terrible cry that we might have heard just before these events happened. No, no, let it not come to this. Soften Pharaoh's heart. Maybe Moses and Aaron can reach some accommodation with the authorities so that the Hebrews can worship and work too. No, no, let it not come to this. Soften the hearts of the Jewish leaders. Let Jesus reach some accommodation with the authorities so that he'll be appreciated as God leading the people to new life. Let him not be seen as just some blaspheming zealot stirring up the people and provoking the Romans. For people of faith in both occasions, the event was bittersweet. In Egypt, the firstborn of the Hebrews had been spared. The judgment of death had passed over them, even as it had killed so many of their friends and neighbors. In Jerusalem, Jesus came in triumph. But those who had been following him, those who had heard his words, knew he would never leave alive. Look closer. Look at the redeeming love of God. I noted back at the beginning of the sermon series that the power of evil is real, and to defeat it takes a real struggle. God does not want to afflict the Egyptian people, but the Hebrews will be set free. It's the power of evil that holds them in bondage, that loads their back with heavy burdens, that denies them their worship. It's this power that must be broken, and the struggle will be hard. Jesus' entry into Jerusalem was also part and parcel of the struggle of God against the power of evil. Forget the trappings of political oppression. Forget the exclusivity of a faith based on human works. Forget even a religion that had come to believe in a domesticated deity, one who could be appeased by the proper sacrifices at the proper times, by the proper people, who purchased them in the proper place for the proper money. Forget all that. Just deal with the central problem of human life and death, the reality of the power of evil. Life is always going to be limited and ultimately futile if that power is allowed to continue. Someone had to defeat it. That someone could be no one less than God in the flesh. Jesus had to meet and defeat the power of evil and death, otherwise the people would never be free. God's own creation would still have to bow to the ultimate finitude. How was this defeat going to occur? Only by Jesus meeting it face to face. The death of the firstborn on that fateful night was the beginning of the end of the captivity of the people to the power of Pharaoh. The triumphal entry of Jesus into Nazareth, into Jerusalem, was the beginning of the end of the captivity of the people to the power of death. I'm here this morning. What is it that we might take home? Just this: that we might never forget that the cries of God's people are always heard. That God will use whatever it takes to do what must be done. And that the way to living can sometimes be through dying. Whether it be physical death passing to life eternal, the death of ambition that leads to humility, or the death of covetousness that leads to true wealth. The choice, friends, is always ours. Pharaoh had the ability to say go, even if he was predisposed to say stay. No one forced Jesus to ride into Jerusalem. I think it's pretty much the deal we get in this world. The way through to freedom, to joy, to life abundant is always a choice. The chasm of slavery and death is always with us. May God grant us wisdom and courage to choose wisely.